Hi, I'm Patric Palm, CEO and founder of Favro, and this is the Learn from Leaders podcast. The background to these interviews is that Favro clients are some of the most innovative and agile businesses out there. And it's used for collaborative planning by marketing teams, by product teams, HR, management teams. And what this means is that we get to know some truly inspiring people. So what we do in this podcast is that I invite them here for a conversation about something where they are true leaders, so we can all learn from it. Let's go.
I have to start by asking you, your family name. It sounds very Swedish. Is there some Swedish roots there, or are we just lucky?
I think you're just lucky. I think I'm mostly Irish English, but who knows, if you go far enough back, maybe there's a little Swedish in there too.
Yeah, there was a Viking sometime, far back there, in 906, who was there in Ireland.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. And you have actually been using Favro at more than one company already, so you're already like a veteran using Favro. So maybe you can just walk us through a little bit, the last few things that you've done and the transitions you've done, because it's quite a lot of difference between these companies.
Yeah. So to give just my quick background, I'm a startup guy, and so I started at a company called Scopely. Grew with them from when they were about 25 people to about 500 or 600, and then I moved over to FoxNext, which is where I started using Favro for the first time. And what I was using Favro for was to replace just Slack messages. I was running a team that was in charge of sending messages for a couple of the mobile games that we were developing. And a lot of times we would get requests for messages, and the number of emails and Slack messages can be really tough to keep up with. And so we adopted Favro and started using that for new message requests, and it made life a lot easier. From outside requesters having visibility into what else the team was working on, and also my team being able to have a full list of everything that's been requested and not have to sift through a bunch of different locations to find everything that they were asked to work on. And then most recently, I moved over to Garage Beer. I moved to Barcelona about a year ago and decided to follow a passion of mine, which is beer and brewing. And one of the first things that I noticed was that there were a lot of processes in place, but there was no formal way to keep track of them. And so again, it was a problem of having so many different platforms and not a good way to corral all of that information. And so something that John actually helped us quite a bit with was building out flows for some of our more complex cross-departmental processes, so that everybody in the organization could see at what stage a beer was in, who was in charge of doing whatever the next step was, and what was going to be the kind of upcoming life cycle for that beer.
That was a fun project.
It was
Actually working on a case study together on that one.
Oh, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So you literally had a beer flow in the Favro.
Yes.
Exactly.
Oh, that is awesome. I like that. I have to ask you, since you've been both at large enterprise, and before that at a game company, and now at the startup again. We have three TV series here that we have The Office with the enterprise, we have the TV series Silicon Valley with startups, and we also have Mr. Quest, Raven's Banquet for the game studio, all of these kind of hilarious shows, brilliant shows making fun of each of them. How I heard and I read people say that a lot of people in Silicon Valley, they don't like watching the TV series startup Silicon Valley because it's too close to reality. What's your feel? You can literally bounce with all of this.
Yeah, if you watch the first season of Silicon Valley, it is very much the experience of working at a small startup, and so it's a great insight into that. Working at small startups is really kind of fun, exciting. Everything's new every day. But at the same time, it's everything's new every day. There's no process. There's no way to really get kind of settled in and feel like you have found a flow for yourself. And so it's, you know, it's not for everyone, but it's a great experience and getting comfortable with the unknown.
Cool. And what about the other? Have you seen The Office, or have you seen Mythic Quest?
Yeah. I watched all of The Office, and so yeah, working at a large enterprise is, you know, I can't say I too deeply identify with The Office, at least not in the same way that I identified with Silicon Valley, because fortunately I've had at both sides I've had competent managers, so you know, no Michael Scotts running around, but but it's just a wildly different experience with you know, quite a bit more just standardized processes, quite a bit more bureaucracy, you know, putting in a request and not finding out until sometimes weeks later if that request is going to go through, because it has to travel, you know, up and down the chain. But you know, it's I'm a startup guy through and through, but you know, having the experience of working at a larger enterprise has been really valuable, just to understand what processes should look like once a company's established. And you know, one of the advantages of working at Scopely from when it was so small to when it got so big was being able to see how that transition can happen.
Yeah, and that's really cool. And you know, it makes me think about, you know, when we look at our client base. I mean, it's basically, you know, three categories. You know, it's startups. You know, it's unicorns that have, you know, grown very, very, very fast, and it is enterprises that are doing strategic initiatives around agile transformation. And you know, when I think about this, you know, another way of seeing it is that, you know, the startups, you know, they really want to scale agility. You know, they want to, you know, stay agile, you know, as they grow. You know, have, you know, these unicorns have grown very fast. You know, they're dead scared of becoming, you know, very corporate, becoming very hierarchical. They want to, you know, keep, you know, the good stuff about being, you know, smaller, about, you know, being a startup, you know, being more agile. So they want to keep that agility, you know, keep a flat organization. And then we have these enterprises that wants to, you know, to become more agile. You know, they want to be, you know, more competitive, you know, faster. They want to be able to adapt faster to things happening in the market, able to operate, you know, more, you know, in many ways as a startup. So it's almost like everyone, you know, having, you know, business agility is kind of really the central theme for all of these groups, even though they come from very different places. And that leads me to my next question to you. You know, how you know, since you have made this journey from being a relatively small team into being a much bigger team, you know, from the perspective of you know, run, you know, agility and processes, what was your biggest takeaways that you feel like you can use now when you're doing this next journey with the startup?
I think one of the things that I've learned quite a bit from going through that transition and then moving back to a small company again is that, one, the things that work for a big company, even if they're really, you know, great efficient processes, don't necessarily translate to a smaller company. And even if they do, it's not always as easy as just picking something up and copy pasting it in. You know, transitioning into that process, whatever it is, you know, important part of the journey. And so, you know, one of the things that, like you said, the small companies really value is agility. And so if you try to come in and create a ton of just really rigid processes, it can end up being less efficient because, you know, when you're a small company, you know who to talk to and kind of how to solve problems sometimes, and that you can't necessarily do at a big company. But yeah, I think small companies maintaining that agility, and I mean, Favro has been a great kind of middle ground for us, where it doesn't necessarily necessitate you have this really strict, rigid flow for everything. You know, different teams at Garage are using Favro differently, and some of the more agile teams are just using it to keep track of individual tasks. Whereas, like I mentioned earlier, we have these more complex flows for how a beer travels through its life cycle.
Yeah, and in this age now of coronavirus and companies are trying to move into more distributed fashion, working from home. How far can you take a beer company? Because obviously beer is a physical product. How far can you go in making a company which ultimately deals with a physical product? How distributed can you be?
That is a question I wouldn't have been able to answer before this, but now that we've gone through the whole pandemic, I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp of that. And that's actually one of the things that I've been most proud of working at Garage is our ability to transition from being just almost exclusively selling our goods through a physical space to moving online. And so the only people who we require to be in the brewery are 1 to 2 brewers. And, to give you some perspective, before the pandemic, we were doing maybe, I think our best online month was maybe €1,000. And then, in April, I think we grew to about 30,000. And so just making that transition to online sales while maintaining as few people in the physical brewery as possible has allowed us to really stay afloat. And so we've realized that the only outside of the people who are packaging beer, making beer, packaging beer, and then putting beer onto trucks, everybody else is capable of working remotely as long as we're kind of maintaining communication.
So that's pretty cool. So not only have you been able to, almost literally run the company as a distributed company, you, in some sense, it's also been, good for your business development.
It really has. I think one of the advantages that we have, one thing that we've taken advantage of is the fact that we're doing way more online advertising, and so. So many of the people who were buying our beer were only getting exposed to it because they knew the brand already or happened to walk into some place where we were selling our beer. And now that we've built up our online presence more, we're capturing customers who we would have never really had the opportunity to.
That is truly cool. I have a friend who wrote a book about famous microbreweries across Sweden, and it's almost like the ultimate, what do you call it, coffee table book. Yeah. It is really cool, and it's really cool with all these interviews with the brewers, because there's a lot of people being very, very passionate about the craft. In that kind of geeky way that I think we also find in, for example, the game industry, where people are just really committed artists, it's definitely an interesting industry. You already mentioned some things around how you've been using Favro, but is there anything you would like to add in terms of any kind of specific problems that you were addressing by using Favro that maybe you weren't able to address with another tool? Maybe if there's some tool you replaced, or if you can add a little bit more color to kind of this use case of Favro.
Yeah, one of the problems that we solved is it's more of an interpersonal problem. The flow that I told you about, generally required people to check in constantly, like, when is this done? When can I do my part? Because so many pieces of this flow need to be sequential. For example, you can't package a beer until you have the labels. And so one of the big problems that we solved was trust. When people are constantly checking in and asking you, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Can I work on this? It doesn't feel great. It never feels great to have to feel like somebody's micromanaging your work. And by moving this flow over to Favro, it allowed people to know what stage everything was in without checking in with people constantly. And it allowed people to see that they didn't need to check in constantly for things to happen, because they could see things flowing. And it also helped with, you don't need to feel like somebody is hounding you all the time to get your work done. And so it's, it solved some efficiency. We made sure things weren't falling through the cracks, et cetera. But I think one of the biggest things it helped with was just getting teams to trust each other and understand that the work is going to get done, whether you are bugging somebody about it or not.
Awesome.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. I certainly did. If you want to elevate yourself as a modern leader and help your teams become even more successful, then check out Favro Academy at favro.com. There you will find podcasts, webinars, articles, all free of charge. Check it out.